Today is the day. It's the day that I solidify my favorite reads from 2024. I'm so excited to talk about the books that left a lasting impact on me. I have 6 books here that I will go into further detail and share some of my favorite quotes and just how they either inspired me or made me look at life in a different way. When I was reading this year, I noticed a theme that a lot of my favorite books had to do with familial relationships. They also had to do with identity and what is the self. So these are kind of the through lines. Also, just getting to piece together information about other people and how we can use their work or their words to allow us to do that. So I'm just going to begin in the order in which I read the books. The first book that I loved and adored this year was Wild and Precious, a celebration of the life of Mary Oliver. I listened to this on audiobook and it made the perfect audiobook read. This is all about the life of Mary Oliver, who is or was a famous American poet. And this just details her life from the perspective of her own work, looking at her poetry, also the work of those who were her students, and then some other prominent artists and writers who really look up to her and kind of use her work as a roadmap for how they want to live their own artist life. This was so touching. It went in such a zoom in, zoom out type of format where we learned more of Mary Oliver's personal life, and she was a bit of a recluse, so this is why I think I love this collection very, very much. There was her reading her own work, and then also just like the anecdotes and stories from her students, how she taught them poetry, and it was just such a touching collection. And at the end of it, I burst into tears because I personally love Mary Oliver. Her work inspires me, and I felt like I went through the journey of her life. It was such a touching read, and I highly, highly recommend. Fantastic audiobook. It's a quick read too, but it's a very emotional read, especially if you love Mary Oliver's work. Okay, the next book that I read and loved was my first Jamaica Kincaid, and this is Annie John. This is set on the island of Antigua, and it follows Annie John as she is growing up from childhood into adolescence and early adulthood. This is a coming of age story that I think everyone should read because it does a fantastic job of analyzing the relationship between a mother and their daughter and how that changes and evolves as the daughter goes from early childhood to adolescence and into early adulthood. Through this, we get insight into how Annie John truly feels about her homeland, living in Antigua, and kind of this need to escape that we have all felt in adolescence. She feels very angsty, but what's really, really interesting is how this fear of losing her mother and this fear of her mother dying kind of evolves and changes to this own forced separation that Annie John creates. And it's haunting in that way, the ways in which you can separate yourself from a parent. There's a beautiful story that Annie John wrote in here, and it was about losing her mother at sea and the sort of anxiety and overwhelming sense of dread that she felt as a result of that. And it kind of breaks your heart because the story moves and Annie John's mother says to her, "I immediately said how much I love this piece of cloth and how nice I thought it would look on both of us. But my mother replied, 'Oh no, you are getting too old for that. It's time you had your own clothes. You just cannot go around the rest of your life looking like a little me.' To say that I felt the earth swept away from under me would not be going too far. It wasn't just that. No accompanying little laugh. No bending over and kissing my little wet forehead." Such a heartbreaking story, and the story has stuck with me. I've thought about Annie John. I thought about the way that she viewed her hometown as a safe haven, and then it transforms into this way of needing to escape, and my heart breaks. But this is such a great coming of age novel that I highly, highly recommend. Another one of my absolute favorite books, Outlined by Rachel Cusk. This is so good, but nothing really happens. But through this, we are following our unnamed narrator who is in her 50s she's middle-aged, and she is traveling to Greece because she is taking a vacation. And we get insight into the different people that she meets on her trip. It first starts off with this man who has been married a few times, and she is talking to him on an airplane. She kind of continues this like weird acquaintance with him in Greece. We also hear from two of her other friends, and through this, Rachel Cusk is essentially posing the question of how do stories play a role in the outline or portrait we make of a stranger? And I just found that question to be so compelling, especially as a storyteller. And what was pretty genius about this is we know very little of our narrator. She is an unnamed narrator, as I said, but we, the reader, are trying to piece together the portrait of the life of this woman through how she interacts with these other characters and people she meets, and what information we know about her. We know that her relationship with her child is a bit strange. She potentially might be divorced as well, but none of that is truly fleshed out, and we're just kind of left guessing and putting together the pieces through the words and what is shared about her from other people and what she decides to share with us. This was, once again, the perfect book to read in the summer. The setting was great. It just made me want to take a trip to Greece. And there is a quote that I think perfectly sums up what this book is and why I really loved it. He was not describing, in other words, what she herself was not. And everything he said about himself, she found in her own nature a corresponding negative. This anti-description, for want of a better way of putting it, had made something clear to her by a reverse kind of exposition. While he talked, she began to see herself as a shape in outline, with all the detail filled in around it, while the shape itself remained blank. Yet this shape, even while its content remained unknown, gave her, for the first time since the incident, a sense of who she was now. It's such a beautiful thing, and it made me think of the ways in which we decide which information to share with strangers or even with people that we do know, and how we piece together our own perspective. Through our own perspective, we're kind of like a painter, and we have a limited perspective of who this person is, what they're into, what their backstory is, what they struggle with. And I just find that to be so compelling. This has actually inspired some of my writing recently, and I want to write a Substack that I kind of have cooking up on a similar topic, sharing that as well. But yeah, this was just such a great book, and it made me, once again, just fall in love with storytelling and that like fine balance between sharing and not sharing, and what that does for the shape of a person. So yeah, this was so good. Highly, highly recommend all of these books, obviously. I accidentally skipped a book, and that was The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois. This was fantastic. A thick book made it onto my list, which if you know me, you know I have big book fear, but I'm ending that in 2025, and it's all thanks to this book. This book was such a sweeping generational tale of a family and what they have gone through moving from Africa through the trade of enslaved people, also like the indigenous ties that this family has to America and Native American culture, to present day, think early 2000s up until, and what the Black experience has been through that. This centers Ailey Parker. Oh, sorry, I keep saying Ailey Parker. Her name is Ailey Pearl Garfield. And she is a young girl. We follow her coming of age story. But once we get pieces of her life, there are also flashbacks of distant ancestors and what they had to go through, the trauma that they endured, the resilience that they showed. And it's also interspersed throughout with excerpts from W.E.B. Du Bois's writing, his philosophies on Black advancement in America, despite these systems that have been put in place to either cause harm to the Black body or the Black person, and prevent or inhibit this mobility. What I found so great is that while these things are being interspersed, these flashbacks are being told, these songs, these love songs literally are sung, this is a story about the power of oral tradition, of oral history, of perseverance, and it was just fantastic. All of the characters felt so alive to me, felt so real. It made me think of my family and my grandma and what my grandparents experienced growing up in the South and how they had to make a way, and just my mother and what she experienced, what my parents experienced, my dad too. I just felt such a close and personal connection to this, but I can gush on and on about this story. Let me just get to the gist of it. Overall, I just felt so many memorable moments from this story, and there was just such a great balance of the good and the bad, the good and the ugly, and just how that is life, and none of it felt unnecessary to me, and it didn't feel out of place. It just felt as though everything had a cause and an effect, and I just love this book so much. This is definitely a book that I will revisit. I will reread this. Just such touching stories in here, and I love this, so please check it out if you haven't yet. It's a thickie, but nothing to be afraid of. So a book that I read after Outline, sorry, this is a little bit out of order now, is The God of the Woods by Liz Moore. This book took me by surprise, although I suspected that I would love it, and it's set in upstate New York in August 1970, and it is about a girl who has gone missing, and the story behind that disappearance. It's set in a summer camp, and one day they wake up and I believe her name is Beth. She is not in her cabin with her cabin mates, and piece together what happened around her disappearance. Is she alive? Is this guy who's on the loose, who escaped from prison, who is a serial killer, did he get to her? Did the woods just naturally kill her? And it's just such a fascinating story because it's a literary thriller, and with that there are themes being discussed of privilege, but then also who suffers at the hand of this privilege. And it's typically the women in the story. There are class dynamics that are happening, which are pretty fascinating. But she is not the first, Beth is not the first person from this family to disappear. Maybe a decade or so earlier, her older brother, Bear, had gone missing, and the family never solved his case. So it's just so good because there were this flashback dual timeline happening where we got we were piecing together Bear's story and then also piecing together Beth's story, and they come together and converge in such a fascinating and unexpected way. This story has so many characters, and usually that would overwhelm me, but I felt like Liz Moore had a perfect balance where I never felt too overwhelmed from the perspectives, and I never felt like each perspective wasn't adding a unique vantage point to the story, which I thought was fantastic. And this book I could not put down. It does a great job of explaining what or how the woods and forests disorient you, and it talks about how the Greek god of panic originates from this sense of being in the woods and losing your sense of place, and how that's disorienting. And I think all the time of the female characters in the story, and just kind of how they had to overcome their own hurdles in society or because of their class. Yeah, it was just so good. I love this story so much, and I think of it all the time. I even lent it out to one of my friends, and she said it was great, and it's just a book that I think everyone should read. It was so good, so well worth the buzz and the hype that it received this year. Okay, and last but certainly not least, I'm gonna end off with my most recent read, Orbital by Samantha Harvey. So this one, the Booker, and this was so good. It follows 4 astronauts, 2 cosmonauts, as they are orbiting the Earth, and we get insight into 16 of their orbits, depending on where they are in relation to the equator of the Earth. Through this, there are meditations, ruminations on what it means to be alive. These astronauts are at a very unique vantage point where they are high, sitting above the Earth, and they're able to see the earth for what it is, for its geography, for its landforms, for the storms that are on the earth, and like this marvelous planet that sustains life. And they also know that people are down there on the earth, and that there are man-made boundaries and wars and just so many beautiful yet terrible things happening on the earth as well. And then it kind of zooms into their own lives and what they have risked to even be in space, the physical toll that space has on their bodies and their psyches, and once again how disorienting it is to not feel gravity and what that effect is like on their physiology. And this book was just so beautiful because it made me feel so appreciative to be alive. It made me feel so grateful to be on this earth. And although not much happens, the main conflict or what we're following through this is, once again, not only the external pressures and quite literally being separated from the void of space by a piece of metal on the space station, but also this super typhoon that is approaching the area of the Philippines and the Maldives, and how these astronauts feel helpless, and just how so much of life is out of our control. But this was just such a touching story, and it made me feel so grateful to be alive. There is a quote that I want to read to you. You look down the length of your body hanging to the rig while you grapple with the pistol grip tool and the torque multiplier and the old bolts that have got stuck, in which you have no force of gravity to remove, and 250 miles beneath your feet, the buffed orb of Earth hangs to like a hallucination, something made by and of light, something you could pass through the center of, and the only word that seems to apply to it is unearthly. It can't possibly be real. Forget all you know. You look back at the vast spread of the space station, and in this moment, it, not Earth, feels like home. Yeah, there are just so many excellent quotes. I have whole pages underlined sometimes of prose. I was just blown away by the writing and the poetry and the philosophy. This is very much a lushy, poetic book where not much happens, but I ate every minute of it up, and it's made me once again feel so happy to be alive and to be able to read and experience storytelling. And I was just blown away by this, totally deserving of everything, and I cannot wait to reread this as well. Oh yes, these are my favorite books of the year, books that have left a lasting impact on me, books that I know I will reread in the future, I will continuously recommend. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you have a lovely, happy new year. And I hope that this 2024 reading year was one that will be the most memorable to you. And I'm just grateful to be here on BookTube as well, and to be in this space. I love you guys. Thank you so much for being here. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye.